So I was on the fence about doing this video. I don't know. Maybe I'll delete everything. Maybe I'll delete it before I publish it. But I wanted to do a a code review of SP underscore human events because I don't know. Sometimes people look through code and they have no idea what's going on, or they I don't know, something. Anyway, just figured I would walk you through my process of writing some of this. So first thing is setting some of the ANSI options to be the correct ones. Um, as God intended, ANSI options or something. And then to create a little stub store procedure if it doesn't exist in the database, and then write this whole thing as an alter same. This is a pretty common practice. I think all SP who is active does this. All the Blitz scripts do something like this. If everyone was on brand spanking new SQL Server versions, I would just say create or alter, but I'm sort of stuck with this. Here are all my parameters so far. There will be more in the future, I'm sure. I write all of my store procedures with the store procedure level recompile just in case I forget any recompiles, but I'm pretty diligent about that. Then we have the help section, which is kind of boring, just some union alls with some text. The first thing that I think someone's going to complain about not working is something in here. I was trying something new with writing the documentation where I'm getting parameter information from some system views. So I don't know, maybe if you're running this from a different database, this will break. Probably will, but I wanted to give it a try, see how it goes. I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. I just wanted to do something new that I don't usually do. So let's get past this stuff. And so the first thing I'm doing is checking, make sure that you're on a supported version. That's pretty obvious stuff there. There's nothing groundbreaking there. And then the next section is written partly out of necessity and partly out of me still trying to work out some bugs in here. So if you start running human events and it creates a session, but then you hit cancel for some reason, it doesn't get to the part where it kills the session. One of the big things here is that the session only runs for the amount of time that you specify by using the way up here, the second sample parameter. So what I want to do is run a session for a limited amount of time and then get rid of it. But I found, in testing stuff that I would start running and be like, oh man, I messed something up. I would hit cancel, but then the session would still be there. So one of the very first things this thing does is look for sessions that are over 2 minutes old. Now, one of my long-term plans with this is to, have sort of permanently running sessions that are just shoveling data off into actual tables to get reported on. That's nowhere near written yet. It's merely been conceived of. And that's one of the reasons why I have this this keep alive parameter, is eventually that's going to add some token to the event name to prevent it from being picked up in here. Like regular, short sampled runs I want to get rid of, but anything that people might be using to continuously track performance data, I want that to be unaffected. So this just opens up a simple cursor. I know a cursor to drop event sessions that look abandoned or orphaned or whatever. Then I declare some pretty simple variables. This gives event sessions unique names. So, if, I don't know, you are doing something and you want to have multiple event sessions running, then you get a unique name for them. Nothing crazy there, just uses a GUID with some stuff replaced. And then I have a standard set of options for setting up the event session. Down the line, I'll probably make this a little bit more configurable, but for V1, this is good enough. And then I start building dynamic SQL to create the event session, and dynamic SQL to start, stop, and drop the event session. And then because I want all of my filters to either filter out system equals 0, or for some reason the block process report has system equals 1 set to it. I don't know. Kind of funny, but that's the way it is. But all the other ones I want to screen out background system processes, because that's not really where my interest with stuff lies. Next is just declaring some variables to hold different filters. And then one thing that I have to check is newer versions of SQL Server have an event that I think I referenced in one of the other videos called SQL statement post compile. And this is an awesome extended event. But in earlier versions of SQL Server where this doesn't exist, then I have to use a couple other extended events that are kind of less awesome but still get the job done. And a promise that I made to myself is to never rely on version checking to figure out if I'm going to use something or not. I always check for that specific thing's existence. So if that exists on your SQL Server, we'll use that. And then because I hate nulls or dealing with nulls or writing a lot of logic around nulls, I set every string parameter to an empty string if it is null. I try to trim any spaces off database names, and then for the blocking, what do you call it? For the blocking event, I need to have a database, object schema, and object name to track down an object ID. Next up is some sanity checking, so I make sure that the event type is something that we can use. Now, I try to put some variations in here because I know people will not put the exact thing that I thought of. So I try to expand, make this so that people could, within a reasonable, margin of error, use the right event type. Then I do some checking on some of the duration parameters. So I want to make sure that if you're using a very, very short duration, that you need to have gimme danger set to 1, or else I will set this back to 500 milliseconds and print a message about it. That's the same thing for query duration, wait duration, and blocking duration. And then I check the sort order that you. So if you are looking at weights, or rather, if you're looking at queries and you want to sort the query results by a specific metric, then I check that here just to make sure it's one that you can actually sort by. And then if it's not one of those, then I'll set it back to CPU. Next up is a string split thing that I use if someone passes in a CSV list of weight types. It just uses some simple XML shredding stuff to do that. I figured this store procedure is so full of XML shredding anyway, why not have some in here to break down the list of weight types? Now, some kind of interesting stuff with weight types is that not all of them are valid, or not all of them are direct one-to-one correlation between what you would see in the weight stats DMV and what's in the extended events. Chief among them is SOS Worker, and I actually read this in a Jonathan Caius post. He, is sort of like the patron saint of extended events. I have learned quite a bit from him over the years about them. So if you're looking for thread pool weights, I replace that because I know not everyone's going to know about that specific thing. So I try to do some work there for you. And then I put those into a temp table. Or rather, if any of the weights that you put in your list don't exist in the extended events DMVs, I stick those into a temp table and I try to warn you about them. Just because, especially because there's so much dynamic SQL in here, and almost none of it is safe. I want to make sure that if someone put something weird in there, that I don't let it slip through. And then I try to keep up that same tradition with these things, where if any of the string values are not the defaults or empty strings, then I want to do some checking on them to make sure that, or to try and circumvent some some potential SQL injection. So I'll take all those values, stick them into a temp table, and then check them against sort of common commands that people can run that might, might suggest that they're up to no good. And then I'll end the store procedure there if I find someone put any of this stuff in there. So note that doesn't that's a different check than the weight stats check. The weight stats check, I don't know, I just don't want to confuse the two. Some other various checks in here, nothing all that interesting. Some stuff to figure out, some stuff to warn you if, the database name, you put in for the blocking check, maybe that messes up. That's there, and then if the object ID that we get back from checking that fully formed object name is null, then we'll throw an error there because I don't want you to end up running the whole event session looking for something that doesn't exist. Next up is a sort of a sanity check one. So if you are trying to run a process to look for blocking and you do not have the block process report enabled, then I want to raise an error, hit return, and give you the command to turn on the block process report. Next up is some, various other sanity checks. If the database name that you pass in isn't valid, or if the session ID that you pass in isn't a number or it's not sample, because remember you can look for a sampling of session IDs, or if the sample divisor is less than 2, because that doesn't really help you with anything. Another check is for usernames. So if I can't find the username that you're looking for on the server, then I'll throw an error there. I'm on the fence about this one. I'm not the world's foremost security expert, and so if I don't know if like this DMV might be like limited in like what usernames it'll show you where. So I'm on the fence about keeping that in there. We'll see what happens long term. Next up is some math to break down and create a valid wait for. You cannot do wait for 60 seconds. You can only do wait for up to 59 seconds, anything beyond that, and you have to start putting in minutes. So I put some stuff in there. And another thing, just another check is if you don't want you running this for more than 10 minutes unless you put gimme danger as 1. Next up is, pretty self-explanatory, setting some individual filters for the dynamic SQL. Nothing too groundbreaking in here. Some stuff to figure out what to look for if we're filtering on blocking, and let's see, if we're filtering out weight stats. This is my list of interesting weights. So what I do is I create a table of weight stats that I care about, and I insert all of those. And I only do that if the weight type parameter is set to all. If you have entered a custom list of weight types, then I will use those weight types instead. So this user weights table is what the string splitter puts the list of weight types into. If it's you get it anyway. Next is some dynamic SQL that goes into. So the really crappy thing about extended events is that weight type IDs have changed, not even within cumulative updates or service packs. Weight type IDs have changed. So there's dynamic SQL in here to generate a where clause based on the values as they exist in sys.dmxe map values. This is another thing that I learned from Jonathan Cahias reading his blog post. So this code is, I guess, dedicated to you, Jonathan, because it wouldn't be here unless I learned that from you. And next is assembling some custom where clauses. Not every event has the same abilities to filter on the same things. So I have to build up sort of custom where clauses for each of these things. And then next is creating the correct event session, which is basically just dynamic SQL and some case expressions to figure out which session type they're looking for, if it's blocking, if it's queries, if it's weights, if they want to capture execution plans, and I'll tack that on. And then here's what I was talking about earlier with what do you call it? So for SQL Server 2012, we can use the wait completed extended event. For SQL Server 2011, we need to use the wait info extended event. And then going down a little bit further is if the compile event is 1, then we'll use the SQL statement post compile. If it's not, then we'll use uncached batch statistics and SQL statement recompile to track compile, recompile stuff. Next is creating the event session and then starting the event session. Nothing too interesting there. And then the wait for that we use to collect data during. Now, after the wait for runs, we put the initial set of XML into a temp table. And then here's where debug starts coming in, or comes in more. You can see that if debug equals 1, then we'll print out the session and start session SQL. And if debug equals 1, then we'll do some selecting from temp tables too, so that we can validate the contents. Next up is some more sort of if logic to figure out if which type of session we ran and which XML shredding we need to do. And you'll see why I broke it down like this soon. There's a lot of different columns that end up in here. And kind of going through this, there are some sort of intermediate steps that we have to take to get the right data from things, like for me to get total and average times for some of the query metrics. I got to do that, and then I got to join stuff back off, and I have to do sort of a crazy cross apply here to get non-null statement text back associated back with the queries, and also I need to do some XML validation to make sure that there's actual XML going on in that column. And here's that dynamic sort order for if you want to choose your, if you want to sort your query results by a different metric. We'll do the same thing for compilations. We want to make sure that we're not finding recompiles, so that's set there. And then we'll with slightly different XML if we need to use the non-new, like the not new version of the compile event stuff. Same thing for recompiles, just about. And then for weights, we have to do some interesting stuff. Now, if you watched all of the videos about this, you remember the SOS scheduler yield video. I was showing how a bunch of like zero, about like SOS has zero for a lot of the results, and that's something that I filter out here using some XPath that I learned while writing SP Blitz Cache. And this only happens if Gimme Danger is set to 1, or rather this will only be overridden if Gimme Danger is set to 1. So you know, try to do that judiciously, I guess. Some more debug stuff, and this is where I break down weights by total, database, and then by query. And finally is for blocking. Now this one I struggled a long time with because it was very difficult for me to get the sort of recursive query right to show data exactly how I wanted it to. So the first thing I do is break down processes that were blocked. And that's this sort of outer apply here to get the nodes for just the blocked process out. Excuse me. And then the next section is to get the blocking process stuff out. And I do have to get some of the sort of some of the XML earlier in the event than we're cross-applying down here to correlate things properly. And then here's a recursive common table expression that I wrote based on my dear friend Paul's sort of, I don't know if I'd call it best practice, but certainly I think his favorite way of writing recursive CTEs. So I did that here, and there's some sort of weird intermediate steps that I take to get the right data out and correlate that to if something was blocking or blocked and whatever, recompile. And then we have the part where we stop the session, and the part where we, if there's an error, attempt to begin catch and, I don't know, roll stuff back or drop the session and, I don't know, whatever. This part is a little bit buggy. I've noticed that there are some errors that will happen where it doesn't seem like the begin catch runs and drops stuff, and I guess that's partly why I added in the bit of SQL at the beginning to drop dormant or orphan sessions. So I'm still working out some bugs in here, but I'm slowly but surely I will figure it out. I'm experimenting with stuff in there. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the store procedure. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you found this at least somewhat interesting and is how the sort of the sausage is made, writing a big store procedure like this and trying to account for some of the lunacy and exceptions and conditions that you might hit in here. I mean, it's not, it's not fully fledged where I'm not checking like we have the correct permissions for everything, but a lot of these store procedures sort of do assume that you have SA privileges on the server already, and you're a trusted person who is allowed to go in there and work on stuff. I don't know. I enjoy writing stuff like this and getting it all to work and getting all the query results to be as correct as I can reasonably ascertain them to be. Sometimes it's more of a challenge than others, and I don't know, whatever. You don't want to hear about me first world probleming in a YouTube video about writing a store procedure about extended events. That's about it. Anyway, this video is probably 10 minutes longer than I wanted it to be, but that's okay. I am finally going to go get that glass of champagne now that I promised you that I would drink after the last video. Then I realized I had 4 videos and it would take 5 videos to occupy a full week of blog posts. So here we are with video number 5, a code review of a store procedure that will most likely look very different a week from now. Anyway, that's it. Thank you for watching. I will see you in some other video some other time. Perhaps holding a glass of champagne. I don't know. Perhaps with the apocalypse and the world crumbling behind me. I don't know. We'll see. It's gonna be an interesting month or so. Anyway, thank you for watching.